Hey guys, Level Cap here, and today I want to talk about some potential future weapons that we could be seeing in Battlefield 1. Now, I don't think we're going to be seeing these weapons on launch day, but because the developers have already included so many prototype or experimental weapons in the game that didn't see large-scale deployment, I don't see why they wouldn't be willing to include some of the other really cool stuff that was prototyped during World War I. And I've been doing some research over the past couple days, and there's some really cool stuff out there, from massive behemoth tanks to huge flamethrowers that could obliterate entire trench systems for several hundred feet. Now, naturally, we don't want this game to get further and further away from what a believable World War I battlefield might be like, and adding a whole bunch of experimental weapons could certainly do that. However, Battlefield 1942, which had a lot of very realistic weapons in it, launched its final DLC called Secret Weapons of World War II, where they implemented all of these crazy weapons that were just prototype phase weapons from World War II blueprints or design boards. And they had stuff like flying wings, they had jetpacks, they even had tracking missile systems. So with one of their DLCs, they're able to have a bit of fun adding all this fun experimental gadgetry to the game, and I think Battlefield 1 could certainly have a DLC similar to that. Now, one of the craziest designs that I came across, and this actually was prototyped, although I don't think they ever took it into battle, was the Russian Tsar tank. Now, this thing was probably the largest tank ever built. It weighed 40 tons and had wheels that were 9 meters in diameter, which is absolutely crazy to think about. You actually had to walk up the back of this thing on sort of a stair-like mechanism to get into the multiple turrets mounted around this vehicle. And it's pretty amazing to look at it. I mean, it had turrets mounted high up in the sky, giving them a huge vantage point of what they might have seen on the trenches. Now, unfortunately, the vehicle had several major design flaws, but ultimately what did it in was the small back wheel. And with 40 tons pressing down a lot of that on a small wheel, it just got stuck in the mud, and they ultimately couldn't get it out of the mud, and they had to leave it in the forest where it got stuck, and it ultimately got disassembled for scrap metal after the war. And despite the design flaws, DICE wouldn't necessarily have to play by those same physical rules, and they could make a working version in Battlefield 1. Now, of course, the Russians weren't the only ones to be working on super tank designs. The Germans were working on a tank called the K Wagon, and actually were building 10 of them. 2 of them were pretty much done by the end of the war. They just didn't have time to implement them. But these things were huge. They weighed 120 tons and had 6 different internal compartments. The tank was 43 feet long and designed to operate with 27 crew members, which is just mind-blowing to me. It's absolutely insane. It had 4 77mm Fortress guns mounted on it, and then 7 MG08 machine guns. I mean, this thing was armed to the teeth. It's absolutely insane, and I think it fits the description of land ship better than any other vehicle developed during the war. Now, the French also began designing a super heavy tank in 1916. However, it was not finished before the end of the war, but they did actually complete the tank regardless of the end of the war. And this was the Tsar 2C. This beast had a crew of 12, a rotating 75mm cannon on top, so like the light tank, it could see all around the vehicle. And then in addition to that, it also had 8 machine guns built into the side. So basically, this thing was protected on all angles from infantry and could point and shoot in whatever direction. Now, personally, this is one of my favorite heavy tanks because it's just got this amazing steampunk look to it. And the fact that there's actual propaganda videos out there showing this thing in action, driving over stuff, crushing buildings, it's just awesome. And I would love to see this kind of vehicle available in Battlefield 1. It's really the only Battlefield game in which this tank could fit into, because by World War II, the tank for the most part was obsolete. Now, there was actually quite a few other heavy tank designs in the works during World War I. Many of them weren't completed, but I think there's enough material there for DICE to actually create like their own heavy tank expansion, or sort of like a super weapons expansion. It would just be so cool to see these massive armored behemoths moving around the battlefield with big crews that actually all got to man powerful weapons and play an important role in keeping the tanks alive. 5. Now, I've been focusing a lot on these land vehicles, but there is one super weapon that's just absolutely incredible, and that was used around 2 or 3 times during the war, and that was the super flamethrower, or rather the Livens Large Gallery Flame Projector. Now, the British developed this weapon to be used in conjunction with trench warfare, and the only way you could get it close enough to the enemy trenches was to build it in a tunnel that the British were digging closer and closer to the enemy trenches. And basically they built a 56-foot long device in a tunnel which had a flamethrower head that would come out the top of the tunnel close to the enemy trenches and spew a huge line of flame towards the enemy that could go up to 100 or 130 feet. And I'm sure its killing radius was far beyond that, as the heat of it was so intense that I imagine if you were even near where that flame landed, you were supposed to focus a lot on trench warfare, or at least theorize to focus a lot on trench warfare, so that might be a good place to implement that weapon. It could definitely be a stationary weapon that an infantry could activate and just hose down the enemy trenches, or maybe you could power it on, or that would be part of the objective, is to activate the weapon and then just obliterate the enemy with it. It would be pretty incredible to see in the Frostbite engine, if not for the gameplay, just the wow factor alone. Now, another idea that I had for the game isn't necessarily an experimental weapon, but sort of a class, if you will, or maybe a super soldier that you could get as a battle pickup. Many soldiers during the war were trained as grenadiers and carried lots of grenades for assaulting enemy trenches. The Germans had a grenadier that would be used to go in and just chuck tons of grenades into trenches and then assault the trenches. And they had these satchels of grenades on them that I don't know how many grenades they would carry, but a lot. And obviously this would be a bad idea to give just any player this ability, because then it would just increase the grenade spam like 50-fold in the game. But if this were a super class, a battle pickup that you could get, where you could just get a whole bunch of grenades and then some extra health and armor, and you could just grenade the heck out of buildings and trenches and enemy fortifications, that would be a pretty interesting class to play. There's a lot of really cool technology and innovations that were out there, stuff that was either in prototype phase or only lightly used during the war, and I'm certainly not a war historian. I'm reading up on it more and more every day, but I'm sure there's some crazy stuff out there that I don't know about yet that could also be implemented. What do you guys think about having sort of a secret weapons or a prototype weapons expansion for Battlefield 1? I know the game isn't out yet, so we're not even like bored of the normal content yet because it hasn't come out, but I just keep thinking about it and thinking how cool it would be to see these massive behemoth tanks rolling around on the battlefield. You could even design a game mode around it. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap signing off.